The crime scene appeared to be staged, but the question is, why? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Susan Clary. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, yes, I know I need a haircut. I'm well aware. Anyway, one day it'll happen. Real quick before we get started, hey, if you're new to my channel, my name is Mike. I tell multiple true crime stories every single week here on YouTube. So please subscribe if you are into that kind of thing and you're a bunch of cuckoo wackadoos like the rest of us. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. I have a couple of different pages. Feel free to check those out and follow those if you want to. The links to those are in the link tree in the description of this video below, and the links to those pages also pop up here at some point in the beginning and at the end of the video. Also in that link tree below, you will find my merch store. We have t-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that. We ship all over this entire world, so check it out if you'd like. And then lastly, if there's a case you want me to cover, just send me a super quick email. My email is listed below as well. Just send me the name of the individual or the case, where it happened, and when it happened. That's all I really need to know. You can send links if you want to articles and stuff too. That's always helpful. But just send it to my email. I'll add it to my list. My list is over 6,000 names long. I pick the cases that I cover each video at random, so it may be a long time before I get to that case, but I will get to it eventually. So, without further ado, let's get into today's case. I can never be normal, not even for like just a second. Susan Clary was born on June 2nd, 1962, and she was born and raised in North Carolina. This was specifically in Halifax County in the Weldon, North Carolina area, like a small little town, I believe. She was actually adopted. Her adopted mother was unable to have children of her own, and she also had another adopted brother who was about 3 years older than she was, and his name was Michael. Susan would later go on to graduate from Weldon High School. She then would go to Halifax Community College, where she took a 2-year course in the medical secretary field, I guess. Over the course of all of this time, she had also been working at Taylor's Fish House just to make ends meet. She started that when she was an early teenager, I believe. On October 4th, 1982, her career aspirations took a complete turn, actually. She, along with another young woman named Linda Griffin, they were actually sworn in to the Weldon Town Hall, and Susan specifically was sworn in to be the county's tax collector, and then the other individual, Linda, was sworn in as the town clerk. Susan was only, I believe, 19 years old at that time. She was also married, Susan was, and it was a relatively new marriage. I think they had only been married for less than a year or so. When this case occurs, Susan is actually pregnant with her first child, and she was 8 months pregnant. And they knew they were having a boy, and they were going to name him Chad. Susan was beyond elated and happy and thrilled to become a mother. She was so looking forward to having the baby and raising the baby with her husband and starting this really great little family. Susan was such a loving and helpful person. She was always in it. Whatever she was always doing something to help people. But unfortunately, Susan's life would be cut very short, as would the life of her unborn child. Susan and her husband lived in this little house on 937 Washington Avenue. It was May 16th, 1983. At some point that late morning or early afternoon, Susan's father would be called by the town hall people who worked there to say that Susan didn't show up for work that morning. And that's extremely unusual for her because she had never missed work before. Her superiors just thought it was super strange, and so that's why they got a hold of her dad. And so her dad would drive out to the house that Susan lived in. Her husband, Timothy, was not home that morning because he left the house, according to him, sometime around 7 or 7:30 that morning to go visit his father. As her dad entered the home, the door was unlocked. There were no signs of forced entry. There were no doors broken, no windows broken, no screens cut. There were no signs of any kind of foul play in the house. Everything seemed completely normal until he got to the bedroom. When he did, he found Susan's nude body lying on the bed. She had a bra kind of sort of wrapped around her neck, and she was very clearly deceased. The authorities were called, they arrived, and so the issue is, from the get-go, there were like 15 to 20 different officers and people who kept coming in and out of this house. From what I can see, it looks like some of them weren't maybe wearing all of the protective gear they should have been wearing, and they were kind of just traipsing all over the place and kind of contaminating the crime scene. Ultimately, it would be determined that Susan's cause of death was asphyxiation. She was not strangled at all. The coroner determined that the bra around her neck wasn't even used in anything, wasn't used to kill her. They also noted that there was like furniture moved around, but it was moved in weird positions because I guess they said if a struggle had taken place in the bedroom, the furniture should have been moved the opposite direction, not the direction they found it in. I'm not 100% sure what that means. They're not too specific about it, but it just says it looked unusual. There were also 2 guns found inside the house, one of which was actually right next to the bed. Neither gun had a single bullet fired from them. There was a jar full of money found open just in the house. You could see it very clearly. There was pieces of expensive jewelry sitting out on tops of the furniture. Not touched, not stolen. Money wasn't stolen. The guns weren't stolen. Nothing was stolen. And despite the fact that Susan was found nude, there was absolutely no signs of a sexual assault whatsoever. No male bodily fluid found in her. The bra around her neck was placed in a way that made it look like the killer wanted people to think she was strangled with the bra, but she wasn't. All of this adds up to a crime scene that was very clear to them that it appeared to be staged, that someone made it look the way it did in order to what? Fool police and think that this was like a possible home invasion gone wrong, a robbery gone wrong. If there were fibers or any kind of hair follicles or anything that could have been potentially found next to her or somewhere on the bed, they were completely contaminated by all of the police officers who had walked in, who were not wearing protective headgear. They weren't wearing the little things over their shoes. It was just, there would be, at that point, if they had found anything after the fact, they would never have been able to know who it belonged to. If it was the killer or if it was just a careless cop. Another thing that's kind of made us look like something other than what it looked like was that they had 2 dogs. There was a Siberian Husky found in the house, unharmed, and then a Doberman Pinscher found out in the backyard, chained up, also unharmed. The neighbors would report not hearing any barking that morning, despite the fact that both of these dogs started to bark relentlessly at the officers as they arrived. And it's because they weren't familiar with the officers. So if someone went into that house and killed Susan, how come no one heard the dogs barking? Does that mean that the person who entered the home was someone the dogs were familiar with? It's very possible. Another thing that the coroner would notate was that they could tell based on bruising that there was pressure on her chest, I guess just above her breasts and at the base of her throat. It looked to them as if someone had either maybe put their foot there or more than likely kneeled on that part of her body in order to maybe pin her down. They also said it could have maybe potentially been an arm with someone's full body weight pressing down on it. And what that indicated to the coroner and in some police officers was that someone was trying to subdue her. And they think that, was there a fight, an argument that broke out between Susan and her killer? The killer then kind of got her to the ground and pinned her down just to get her to what? Stop arguing, stop what? Who knows? And then potentially this was an accidental death. That's this argument led to that person doing that, thinking they were just trying to calm her down or subdue her, but ended up killing her because they restricted her ability to breathe, and she died of asphyxiation. And then, because that happened, did the person then stage the house to look like a potential sexual assault that went wrong? With the nude body, with the bra being used to strangle her. But if someone staged it, you would also think they would have maybe taken some things or made the house look in more of like disarray, as if someone has maybe pulled drawers out. There wasn't really any of that. Furniture in the bedroom had been moved around, like I said earlier, to indicate there may have been a potential fight or struggle inside the bedroom. Is this why the furniture in the bedroom was kind of moved to make it look like a fight had taken place where it caused furniture to move around? But they said, according to the way a fight would have happened naturally in this room based on the location of the furniture was moved the opposite direction you would have expected. Her husband, Timothy, was essentially the first suspect in the case, and they were able to determine that he likely left the house probably around 7:40 in the morning. Her time of death was sometime in that general vicinity, but they couldn't say for sure that it happened before he left. They did verify that he'd gone to his father's house and he had to drive all the way back to the house once he was informed of what happened. They gave him one polygraph test on I think it was the day the murder happened. And he was in such an emotional, his heart was racing so much. He was in such emotional wreck that day that his test was completely inconclusive. They then offered to give him another test. At the end of that test, he says that the polygraph examiner just looked at him and said, "You didn't do it." So I guess that means a polygraph would have indicated that he was telling the truth. However, as we all know, polygraph tests they're not an exact science, and they are really not great at determining if someone truly is guilty or innocent. I'm not saying he's guilty of this, but it's just, those aren't exactly the most reliable things. But he did play the role of a grieving husband. I mean, he did appear to be truly devastated. Not only did he lose his wife, but he also lost his unborn son. They both died that day. Timothy spoken pretty early on in the investigation. He seemed to be pretty cooperative, and he answered any questions they had, and they never found any evidence to say that he did this. He would be quoted later on as saying, quote, "It's terrible. Every time you get to thinking about it, you get depressed and you can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had just stayed there. Maybe I could have prevented it, and maybe he would have killed me and Susan would have lived. I don't know. I still love her and I miss her every day, and not a day goes by that I don't think about her." End quote. And that's pretty much the tune he has kept with this whole time. I don't know exactly whose names they had, but I do see that they had two persons of interest who were not the husband that they interviewed pretty thoroughly, that they investigated, but never had any evidence to say they actually did this. One of the first investigators who worked on this case said that it appeared that this was likely done by a much larger person based on the fact of, like I said earlier, with someone putting all that pressure on her chest and throat that caused her to stop breathing. And I can only assume they looked into people who maybe fit that bill, that were a part of her life, but they've never brought anyone out to the media's attention as this is a suspect. This is the one we're looking at. So I'm actually reading in another article, and I want to correct myself because it looked like I said earlier that the husband was always very, very cooperative. But now I'm seeing a quote from another detective where he said, quote, "One feeling of regret that I have is that Tim Clary failed to fully cooperate. However, that regret may not end up being just mine. I would encourage anyone with a conscience and information in this case to contact the detective at the sheriff's office." End quote. Okay, so it looked like, hey, we're doing this in real time, I guess. So it looked like at one point he was cooperating, but then I guess it got to a point where he was not cooperating. But again, there's just no evidence to say he did it. And ultimately, it's what's the motive here and why was the crime scene staged? The only person that would have a benefit of staging the crime scene would honestly be the husband. If this was a random intruder, why would they stage it that way? But we have now fast forwarded all the way to 2024. I do know that there was plans to take whatever evidence they may have had and try to incorporate new and modern technology into this to see if they can pull any DNA or anything like that from anything, like skin cell DNA, touch DNA, anything at all. But they don't really have much forensic evidence at least early on, to link to anyone. And because of all of the crime scene contamination, they may not have the proper evidence ever. I can also see that a lot of the family has since passed away. Some of the suspects that they had early on have passed away, whoever they may have been. Ultimately, they just want to know for sure who did this. They just want that answer. Whatever family still remains deserves those answers. Susan and her unborn child, Chad, they deserve that. This happened in 1983, so it's a little over 40 years ago. There's still a chance that the person who did this is alive. I mean, there's a very good chance they may still be alive, which means there's still plenty of time for that person to be punished and spend the rest of their life in a prison cell. But they are going to be relying at this point on people coming forward and people saying what they know, because odds are somebody knows something. Like we always say, someone somewhere out there knows the truth, and maybe that someone is you. Maybe the killer talked. Maybe you are the killer and you want to come forward. Probably not, I'm sure. But maybe that killer said something to you. Or maybe that killer said something to someone you know, and that someone told you. If you have any information, any at all, the teeniest bit of information could break the whole case. So please come forward with it if you have that information. You can always report that information anonymously. You don't have to say who you are. You just have to say what you know. So if you have that information, you can call 252-583-4444 or 252-406-6736. There is currently about $15,000 being offered as a reward for any information that helps lead to the capture of Susan Clary's killer, whether that be her husband or someone totally different. Susan deserves justice. Her unborn child deserves justice. Whoever did it should be behind bars. So please help Susan and her unborn baby get the justice they both rightfully deserve.